All right, welcome to this explainer. So we're going to dive right into a really fascinating cultural paradox that honestly we're all living through right now. Think about it. We spend so much of our time staring into these little glowing rectangles, kind of being quietly taught that a life only truly counts if it has an audience, right? Well, today we're exploring the psychology behind the people who simply stop posting. If you didn't post it, did it really happen? I mean, saying it out loud sounds totally absurd, but let's be real, it's a genuine modern anxiety. Think about those digital ghosts you stumble upon. You know, those silent profiles just frozen in time, no stories, no updates, literally zero proof of movement. When we see those empty feeds, our minds instinctively rush to fill in the blanks. We instantly assume, oh, they must be struggling, or wow, they're completely disconnected from society. But you know what? That unsettling feeling actually says a whole lot more about our own conditioning than it does about their reality. Which brings us to section 1, the pressure to perform and blurring the line between experience and exposure. To really understand why someone else's silence makes us so uncomfortable, we've got to look at this performative split we've created for ourselves. Historically, there was this very subtle shift where we stopped just feeling things and started framing them instead. Come on, we've all been there, literally letting our dinner get completely cold just to capture that perfect overhead lighting. When your life is shaped around how it looks, you actually end up stepping back from your own experience. You start observing yourself in real time, constantly asking, is this impressive enough? Is this gonna land? And it leaves us living these lives that are, well, half-lived and half-managed. That takes us to section 2, the neuroscience of digital validation, or tying self-worth to an algorithm. So this whole trap, it really comes down to a single chemical, dopamine. Every single notification you get triggers a tiny little release of this motivation chemical. It is literally like carrying a digital slot machine in your pocket, constantly telling your brain, hey, pay attention to this, do it again. But here's the catch, the brain adapts super quickly. Your baseline shifts, so what once felt incredibly rewarding simply becomes a new normal. And eventually, getting fewer likes literally registers in your brain as a personal rejection. It's crazy, but without even realizing it, we completely tie our self-worth to an algorithm. Moving on to section 3, the psychology of silence, measuring the inner world without public reaction. So, what actually happens when someone just totally opts out of that loop? Well, the people who stop posting definitely aren't immune to pleasure or joy. They just don't use public reaction as their measuring stick anymore. It all comes back to what psychologists call an internal locus of control. Basically, people with a really strong internal locus know a conversation was deeply meaningful because they genuinely felt understood in the room, not because someone applauded a post they made about it later. Their sense of value and progress, it's generated entirely inward. Look at it this way. When you rely on external validation, your emotional stability is always at risk. You're literally at the mercy of strangers mindlessly scrolling on their phones. But with internal validation, your emotional stability is incredibly secure. You don't have to constantly package your moments for approval anymore. You can just live them. There's this fascinating behavioral science concept that hits the nail on the head here, signaling theory. It's the idea that we're constantly broadcasting the traits we want others to believe we possess. But there is a massive paradox built right into this whole thing. The more urgently something is broadcasted, the less secure it usually is. I mean, we've all seen that couple who post 3 massive anniversary paragraphs a week, right? When happiness or love needs constant, extremely loud proof, it's usually because it hasn't quite settled internally yet. What's truly stable doesn't need to convince. Think about that for a second. When a person is truly full, they just don't need to reach outward for proof. Deeply internalized joy honestly doesn't need a caption. And non-posters, they intuitively understand this saturation point. They know that their relationships and their big milestones absolutely do not need digital witnesses to count. And that brings us to section 4, the hidden tax of visibility, the exhaustion of being perceived. You know, being seen is so often sold to us as connection, but the actual costs of it are incredibly steep. Scanning for feedback, constantly anticipating judgment, editing your very natural reactions, preparing explanations for every little thing. It creates severe identity fatigue. Psychologically speaking, being perceived activates self-consciousness, and too much of that turns into this subtle, exhausting hypervigilance. Your nervous system actually starts treating being seen as a threat, a real risk, especially if you grew up in an environment where attention usually meant criticism. Trying to maintain these expected versions of yourself, it is absolutely exhausting. And there's another hidden tax happening right inside our brains, something called cognitive offloading. Have you ever been at an amazing concert, but you ended up watching almost the entire thing through your phone screen just to make sure you got a good video? Well, in that split second, you decide, oh, this would make a good post. You instantly shift into the role of an observer. Because we rely on our devices to hold the memory for us, our brains actually record way less of the emotional texture of that moment. Sure, we keep the digital image, but we completely lose the atmosphere. Some things can only be kept by letting them pass through you unrecorded. This is the beautiful trade-off that non-posters are actively making. They choose to leave a genuine laugh completely undocumented, or a stunning sunset entirely uncaptured, so that their nervous system can remain fully 100% present. The moment survives, but not as content. It survives as a deeply felt physical memory, which leads to Section 5, healthy versus unhealthy silence, differentiating peace from pain. Now, let's be super clear here. We absolutely cannot just blindly romanticize all digital withdrawal, because sometimes silence is a glaring signal of pain, not peace. Unhealthy silence is usually shaped by shame and comparison. It happens when someone withdraws because they just feel totally inadequate next to everyone else's polished highlight reels, which ends up shrinking their offline life and leading straight to isolation. But healthy silence, that is completely different. That is rooted in genuine strength. It's about intentionally stepping out of that performative loop to maintain a peaceful equilibrium in your nervous system. And the best part, their real offline engagement actually expands because of it.
All right, our final section, number 6. Reclaiming your offline life and returning agency to your digital choices.
So if you want to shift the balance back from a mindless reflex to an intentional choice, try asking yourself these 3 things before your very next post. 1, if literally no one could see this, would I still want it? That right there cuts straight through the performance. 2, am I sharing this from a place of fullness or from fear? Remember, fear desperately wants to be validated by a reaction, but fullness doesn't rush. And 3, what parts of my life actually feel safer when they stay just mine? Honestly, just walking through these questions reveals whether you're selecting a moment for your own rich experience or if you're just curating it for an audience. A life that doesn't need witnesses is not a small life, it's a grounded one. When what you feel, what you do, and who you are all finally begin to align without needing any external confirmation, you achieve a level of coherence and peace that digital approval could literally never provide. You are allowed to change quietly without having to explain yourself in public. So, here is a question I really want to leave bouncing around in your head today. What is one part of your life that simply feels better when it stays unwitnessed? Seriously, take some time to reflect on that, because sometimes the most profoundly meaningful lives simply do not need to be seen to be real. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.